In the suffocating gloom of an underground vault, a deal is struck. Blue is sold for $10 million. To the cold-eyed men in suits and her own cowardly father, who gambled her away to settle his debts, she is merely a broken girl. Ajoong, the scarred and merciless predator who bought her, sees a submissive prize. He threatens to dismember her father if she flees, unaware that he has just invited his greatest threat into his inner sanctum. In reality, the frightened girl is the ghost, an elite intelligence operative who was days away from dismantling Ajoong's global weapons empire. While her father whimpers and her captors gloat, Blue is playing a high-stakes game of infiltration. She has already cataloged the exits, identified the guards' weaponry, and calculated her escape routes down to the second. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and let us know your location in the comments. If you're enjoying this story, share it with a fellow book lover. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you're always the first to hear our latest tales. Her tears are a calculated mask, her trembling a tactical performance. By playing the sacrificial lamb, she has bypassed Ajoong's digital fortresses and secured a direct path to the heart of his operation. As she is handed over to her owner, Blue recognizes that her disguise is flawless. The wolf thinks he has caught his prey, but the hunter has finally arrived. The mansion rose before her like a fortress carved from midnight itself. Black stone, iron gates, windows that reflected nothing but darkness even in daylight. Blue stepped out of the car, her single bag clutched against her chest, and felt the weight of a dozen invisible eyes watching her arrival. Ajoong hadn't spoken during the drive. He sat across from her in the back seat, reading something on his phone, occasionally taking calls in a language she recognized as Korean mixed with English. She kept her head down, playing the terrified victim, but her trained ears caught fragments. Territory disputes. A shipment delayed at the port. Someone named Kael handled the negotiations. The front door opened before they reached it. A severe woman in her 50s, dressed in black, stood waiting. "This is Mrs. Chen," Ajoong said, the first words he'd spoken to Blue in an hour. "She manages the household. You'll obey her as you obey me." The woman's eyes raked over Blue with undisguised contempt. "Another one," she muttered in Mandarin, probably assuming Blue wouldn't understand. "They never last more than a month." Blue said nothing, just followed them inside. The entrance hall could have swallowed her father's entire apartment 3 times over. Marble floors, a chandelier that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, artwork that belonged in museums. Everything is pristine, cold, untouchable. Like Ajoong himself. He stopped at the base of a grand staircase and turned to face her fully for the first time since the vault. "Listen carefully because I don't repeat myself. You live here now. Your room is on the 3rd floor, east wing. You don't enter my private quarters. You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't leave the grounds without permission, which you won't receive. You'll work in the kitchen, help with cleaning, and make yourself useful." Blue nodded, eyes downcast. "Mrs. Chen will handle your schedule. You eat with the staff. Any requests go through her." His voice dropped lower, colder. "And if you try to contact anyone outside these walls, if you try to run, if you even think about betraying me, I'll know. And then I'll make you watch while I finish what your father started." He walked away without waiting for a response, his footsteps fading into the depths of the mansion. Mrs. Chen grabbed Blue's arm with surprising strength. "Come. I'll show you where you sleep. Then you start work immediately. We're preparing for Mr. Kael's arrival tonight." Blue let herself be dragged through servants' corridors and up narrow staircases. Her room was small but clean, a single bed with white sheets, a dresser, a tiny bathroom. A prison cell with better furniture. The moment Mrs. Chen left, locking the door from the outside, Blue moved to the window. 3rd floor facing the gardens. She counted the security cameras, noted the patrol patterns of the guards walking the perimeter. Then she opened her bag and removed the false bottom she'd sewn in during the 10 minutes of privacy they'd given her to pack. Inside, a slim phone with encrypted connections, a set of lockpicks disguised as hairpins, and a flash drive containing every piece of intelligence she'd gathered on Ajoong before her cover had been compromised. The agency thought she was burned, her mission aborted. They'd pulled her entire team out. But Blue hadn't survived 7 years as a ghost by giving up when things got complicated. She'd been handed a gift, actually. Now she lived inside the target's home, with access to everything she'd been trying to reach from the outside. She just had to survive long enough to use it. 3 days into her tenure as a captive, Blue stood before the heavy mahogany door of Ajoong's private sanctum. It was 2 a.m. The mansion was a tomb of silence, save for the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the foyer. With the steady, practiced hands of an elite operative, she inserted 2 hairpins into the lock. For 72 hours she had played the role of the clumsy maid to perfection. She had spilled tea, scorched toast, and endured the shrill rebukes of Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper. To the rest of the staff she was a pathetic creature of pity or a ghost to be ignored. They saw a girl drowning in her own incompetence. They did not see the woman who was mentally mapping every security camera's blind spot and timing the patrols of the armed guards. With a soft click, the lock yielded. Blue slipped inside, closing the door with a ghost's touch. The study was an altar to power, leather, dark wood, and the scent of expensive tobacco. She knew the layout from her previous intelligence gathering. One camera mounted above the door. By hugging the wall at a specific angle, she remained a shadow in its peripheral vision. She reached the desk and produced a flash drive hidden in a secret seam of her uniform. The computer glowed to life, demanding a password. Blue didn't panic. For 3 days, she had memorized the cadence of Ajoong's typing from afar, noting which sectors of the keyboard his fingers favored. She had 5 attempts before a silent alarm would lock the system and summon the guards. Attempt 1, fail. Attempt 2, fail. Attempt 3, success. Data began to flood the drive. Shipping manifests, offshore accounts, and encrypted personnel files. The progress bar was agonizingly slow. 50%. 60%. A floorboard groaned in the hall. Blue's heart didn't race, it still. She had 10 seconds. The download was at 75%. Not enough to sink the empire, but staying meant capture. As the doorknob turned, she yanked the drive, killed the monitor, and slid under the massive desk. The door opened. Polished black Oxfords entered her field of vision, stopping inches from her hiding spot. She heard the gurgle of liquid, whiskey, and the sharp clack of a glass meeting wood. Then a phone rang. Yes, Ajoong's voice was like grinding stones. I don't care about Kael's promises. The shipment stays put until I've seen it. I'm not repeating the disaster in Tokyo. He listened, his hand drumming on the desk just above Blue's head. If Kael is making unauthorized deals, he can explain himself to me tomorrow night. Set the meeting. The door closed a moment later. Blue waited 5 minutes, her muscles screaming before emerging. She had more than just data now, she had a name. Kael. There was a rift in the organization, a scent of mutiny. The next morning, the mission took an unexpected turn. Ajoong informed her over a silent breakfast that her father had suffered a massive heart attack. They were going to the hospital. At the private clinic, a place where questions were never asked, Blue watched through a glass partition as her father lay hooked to a hive of machines. He looked small and fragile, stripped of the terrifying presence he'd held over her childhood. He needs surgery, the doctor informed Ajoong. The recovery will be long and the costs extreme. Handle it, Ajoong replied without blinking. Bill it to my primary account. Blue turned to him, stunned. Why? Ajoong met her gaze with a chilling neutrality. He is under my protection. I'm not wasteful, Blue. Your father owes me a debt and dead men cannot pay. He allowed her 5 minutes alone in the room. When she approached the bed, her father's eyes fluttered. Blue, he wheezed. I'm sorry, for everything. That man Ajoong, he isn't what you think. You need to know why he... The machine suddenly screamed. Nurses flooded the room, shoving Blue aside. By the time the crisis passed, her father was sedated, his secret lost to the fog of drugs. In the car ride back, the silence was heavy. Blue struggled to reconcile the intelligence reports, which labeled Ajoong a butcher, with the man who had just saved her father's life. Why pay for him? She asked quietly. The debt would be gone if he died. Ajoong didn't look away from the window. You belong to me now. And I take care of what is mine. The words felt like a brand. She was property, yes, but protected property. It was a complication she hadn't planned for. It was easier to destroy a monster than a man who showed mercy, however transactional that mercy might be. That evening, the mansion prepared for a dinner meeting. Blue was assigned to serve water, a role that allowed her to be a literal fly on the wall. Kael, a man with a silver-tongued charm and eyes like a shark's, sat to Ajoong's right. He was explaining the Tokyo situation with practiced ease. The buyers were spooked by the Singapore raid. I offered a discount to keep the contract. You offered my money, Ajoong countered. And you did it because the Singapore route was leaked. Someone gave the authorities our coordinates. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kael's smile faltered. We are investigating the leak, Ajoong. My team is. Your team had access to those routes, Ajoong interrupted. I want a full audit of every person you employ. Every text, every call. Blue, leaning in to refill Kael's glass, felt a surge of intuition. She intentionally let her hand slip. Water splashed across the table. "You clumsy fool," Mrs. Chin hissed, grabbing Blue's arm and dragging her toward the kitchen. But in that second of chaos, Blue saw it. Kael wasn't looking at the spill. He was looking at Ajoong with a look of pure, murderous calculation. Subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoyed this tale, share it with a friend and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Later that night, Blue crouched by a ventilation duct in the servants' quarters. Ajoong's voice drifted down from the floor above. "Run the audit quietly. If there's a rat, I want them to feel safe. People make mistakes when they feel secure." Blue retreated to her room, her mind racing. She had enough evidence now to call in a raid. If she alerted her handlers, the agency would swoop in, Ajoong would be neutralized and her mission would be over. But if Kael was the one leaking information, if he was sabotaging Ajoong to take over the empire, then the agency was targeting the wrong man. If Ajoong fell, a far more chaotic and reckless leader would take his place. She deleted the draft of her report. She needed more. She needed to get into Kael's office in the East Wing, the one area of the house she was strictly forbidden to enter. The opportunity arrived 3 days later. Ajoong announced a grand gala to be held on Saturday. Every major player in the underworld, along with corrupt politicians and judges, would be in attendance. A show of unified strength, Ajoong called it. But Blue knew better. It was a trap. Ajoong was keeping his enemies close and Kael would be right beside him. As the mansion transformed into a glittering palace of silk and crystal, Blue used her cleaning rounds to scout the East Wing. Kael's office was a fortress, biometric locks and dedicated security. But during the gala, the guards would be focused on the perimeter and the high-profile guests. She would have a 20-minute window while the main toasts were being made. On Thursday, while serving tea, she caught Ajoong watching her. "You look tired, Blue. Take tomorrow afternoon off." "Thank you, sir," she murmured, avoiding his gaze. She returned to her room and began piecing together the fragments of the files she had stolen. A pattern emerged. Every operation that had failed in the last year was one managed by Kael. It wasn't incompetence, it was a systematic dismantling of Ajoong's power. If Kael was going to strike, the gala was the perfect stage. Blue sat in the dark, the weight of her dual identity pressing down on her. Her mission was to destroy the organization. But to do that effectively, she had to ensure the right person was in the crosshairs. She thought of the way Ajoong had spoken at the hospital. "I take care of what is mine." She wasn't protecting a criminal, she was protecting the integrity of the mission. At least that's what she told herself. Tomorrow she will break into Kael's office. She would find the proof of his betrayal. And then the ghost would decide which monster deserved to fall. The lines between the spy and the sacrificial lamb were blurring, and as the night of the gala approached, Blue realized that in a house full of predators, she was the only one who knew exactly who was hunting whom. The lock on Kael's office was a masterpiece of modern security, far more complex than the traditional mechanisms in Ajoong's study. It took Blue nearly 3 minutes of focused, agonizing silence to bypass it. When the tumblers finally aligned with a muffled click, she slipped into a room that was the antithesis of Ajoong's, cold, minimalist, and dominated by chrome and glass. She reached for the computer, flash drive in hand. She never heard the door open. The overhead lights flared, blinding her. Blue spun around to find Ajoong leaning against the frame, his arms crossed with a deceptive casualness. "Interesting place for a servant to spend her evening," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Blue's mind fired through a dozen contingency plans, but the reality was undeniable. She was caught with lockpicks in one hand and an encrypted drive in the other. For the first time in her career, she abandoned the script and gave him a piece of the truth. "I think Kael is betraying you," she said firmly. Ajoong's expression remained a mask of granite. "That is a heavy accusation. Do you have proof or just a vivid imagination?" "Singapore. Tokyo. The compromised routes in the Mediterranean," Blue rattled off, her voice steady. "They all share one common denominator, Kael's oversight. He isn't unlucky, Ajoong. He's sabotaging you." Ajoong pushed off the doorframe and moved toward her with the silent grace of a wolf. "And you know this because you've been spying on me." "I know it because I'm paying attention," she countered, refusing to flinch as he stopped inches from her. He reached out, his fingers gripping her chin and tilting her face toward the light. "I've watched you, Blue. I've seen the way you move when you think the halls are empty. The way you process data. You are far too competent to be as clumsy as you pretend. Who are you?" Blue met his gaze. The mask was gone. Someone trying to stay alive. And apparently someone is trying to keep you alive. Why would you care? Because if you fall, Kael takes over. And because you're paying my father's medical bills. A shadow of a smile touched Ajoong's lips. You think he's planning to kill me? I think he's planning a coup at the gala. If you aren't ready, you won't survive the night. Ajoong searched her eyes for a long moment before releasing her. Show me. For the next hour, Blue walked him through the patterns of betrayal she had uncovered. The financial leaks, the staggered logistics, the suspicious communications. Ajoong listened in silence, his face darkening. Finally, he made a call, ordering an immediate clandestine audit of Kael's hidden assets. The gala is still on, Ajoong said, turning back to her. But you won't be serving water. You'll be there as my guest. If Kael moves, I need eyes on him that he doesn't recognize as a threat. I can't. You can, he interrupted. You have skills I clearly underestimated. Give me the drive. Blue looked at the plastic casing in her hand. It held everything the agency needed to bury Ajoong. She hesitated for only a second before placing it in his palm. Mrs. Chun will have you ready by Saturday, Ajoong said, pocketing the drive. And after we catch a traitor, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about who you really work for. The ballroom was a shimmering sea of diamonds and deception. Blue stood at the edge of the crowd, transformed. In a midnight blue gown that flowed like water, her hair swept up and her gaze sharp, she looked every bit the aristocrat. She scanned the room, identifying the wolves in tuxedos, men her agency had hunted for years. Then she saw Kael. He was the picture of charm, though his eyes never stopped tracking the exits and the security details. Ajoong appeared beside her, handing her a glass of champagne. You look dangerous, he murmured. Any news from the audit? She asked. My team found a shell company and an apartment downtown. He's been moving assets for months. Ajoong's jaw tightened. Stay close. He'll move soon. Remember to subscribe, comment with your location and share this story with others. Tap the bell icon to get notified of new updates. The evening reached its crescendo when Ajoong took the platform. He spoke of loyalty and legacy, his voice commanding the room's absolute attention. Then he dropped the hammer. Effective immediately, Ajoong announced, all operations require dual authorization. No move is made without the approval of myself and my new security director. It was a public execution of Kael's authority. Blue saw Kael's hand tighten around his glass until his knuckles turned white. But it wasn't Kael she was worried about, it was the guards. 4 men in the new security detail were shifting, their hands drifting toward their jackets. Ajoong! Blue screamed. She lunged as the first muzzle flash lit the room. Chaos erupted in a symphony of shattered glass and screams. Blue tackled Ajoong off the platform just as a bullet whistled through the space his head had occupied. They hit the marble hard and rolled behind a heavy oak table. How many? Ajoong hissed, drawing his weapon. 4 shooters in the immediate vicinity, Blue said, her tactical training overriding everything else. They're flanking us. We have to move now or we're pinned. The lights died, replaced by the eerie rhythmic pulse of red emergency lamps. Through the haze, Blue saw Kael slipping toward the rear exit, barking orders into a radio. He's escaping, she said. An assassin lunged from the shadows. Without a moment's hesitation, Blue stepped into his guard, her elbow cracking his jaw before a knee to the solar plexus sent him to the floor. Ajoong stared at her, stunned. Where did a maid learn to fight like a Mossad agent? Later, she snapped. East stairwell. Now. They sprinted through the panicked crowd. Ajoong provided cover fire while Blue navigated the most efficient route. They reached the stairwell and Blue jammed a piece of furniture against the door. That won't hold, Ajoong noted, breathing heavily. It doesn't have to. We're going to the 3rd floor safe room. As they climbed, Ajoong paused, looking at the woman who had spent the last week burning his toast and was now saving his life. You're not what I thought, he said quietly. Blue didn't look back. Neither are you. Now keep moving. The safe room was behind a false wall in Ajoong's bedroom, accessed by biometric scan. They sealed themselves inside just as footsteps thundered down the hallway outside. The room was small but well equipped. Monitors showing security feeds from throughout the mansion. Communication equipment. Weapons. Everything needed to survive a siege. Blue moved to the monitors, quickly assessing the situation. 8 hostiles visible, coordinated and professional. They're clearing rooms, she said. Looking for you. My guards? Either dead or part of it. She pointed to one screen showing the ballroom. Most of your guests managed to escape. Kael's gone. Ajoong was already on his phone. I need a tactical team at my location now. Full assault authorization. He gave coordinates, authentication codes, then hung up. 15 minutes. We might not have 15 minutes. On the monitor, 2 of the attackers reached Ajoong's bedroom door. They didn't bother trying to pick the lock, just planted explosive charges. Blue and Ajoong watched as the door blew inward. The attackers entered, weapons raised, searching. One of them moved toward the wall that concealed the safe room. Blue made a decision. Open the door. Ajoong looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Absolutely not. Open it. Trust me. Something in her voice must have convinced him because he hit the release. The door slid open silently. Blue stepped out before he could stop her. The 2 attackers spun toward her, guns raised. A woman in an evening gown standing calmly in what should have been an empty bedroom. Can I help you? Blue asked pleasantly. The closer one lowered his gun slightly, confused. Who the hell are you? Blue smiled. The ghost. She moved. Years of training, countless hours in combat simulations, real-world operations across 3 continents. All of it came together in a fluid sequence of motion that was over in less than 10 seconds. The first attacker's gun clattered to the floor, his wrist broken at an unnatural angle. The second managed to fire once, the bullet going wide before Blue's palm strike crushed his larynx. He went down choking. She retrieved both weapons, checked the hallway, then turned back to where Ajoong stood in the safe room doorway, staring at her. You're an operative, he said flatly. Corporate espionage specialist, technically. She checked the magazine on one of the guns. I was investigating your organization when my father got arrested. The agency pulled me out, but I decided to finish the mission independently. By letting yourself be sold to me. It provided excellent access. She moved back toward the monitors. 6 more hostiles are still active. Ajoong was processing, she could see it in his face. The clumsy waitress. The break-ins. Everything falling into place. You've been gathering intelligence this entire time. Yes. And you just chose to blow your cover to save my life. Also yes. Can we discuss this later? They're moving toward this floor. He stepped up beside her, shoulder to shoulder, both of them armed now. Later we'll discuss how you're going to explain this to whatever agency sent you. And how you knew exactly where my safe room was. I'm very good at my job. Apparently. He almost smiled. What's your real name? You can keep calling me Blue. It's close enough. The lights in the mansion were cut out. Full blackout. The monitors switched to night vision, showing the attackers moving through darkness like they owned it. Ajoong's phone buzzed. His backup team was breaching from the south entrance. But they'd have to fight through the attackers to reach them. Blue studied the tactical situation. We can wait here for rescue. Or we can end this now. Oh. Kael's coordinating from somewhere. Probably his apartment downtown, the one your team is searching. We take out his soldiers here, he loses his leverage. Your backup arrives, we track him down, and this is over. Ajoong considered. You realize you're proposing we fight our way through 6 armed professionals. I've faced worse odds. She glanced at him. Have you? He laughed, short and sharp. I like you better as a spy than a waitress. At least now you're honest about being dangerous. They left the safe room together, moving through the darkened mansion like ghosts themselves. Blue took point, her training making her naturally suited for this. Ajoong followed, covering her back, trusting her in a way that should have felt strange but somehow didn't. They encountered the first pair of attackers on the second floor landing. Blue disabled one with a shot to the leg, Ajoong took the other with brutal efficiency. The third floor was clear. But 4 more were converging on the main staircase trying to trap them. Library, Blue said. Service entrance. They diverted, moving through rooms Blue had mapped weeks ago. She'd memorized every corridor, every exit, every tactical advantage. Now it was paying off. The final confrontation happened in the entrance hall where Blue had first arrived at the mansion. 4 attackers, 2 positions of cover, limited escape routes. Blue looked at Ajoong. On 3? He nodded. They stepped out together, firing in synchronized precision. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't easy. But it was effective. When the backup team finally breached the front doors, they found Ajoong and Blue standing in the center of the hall, weapons lowered, surrounded by incapacitated hostiles. The team leader stared. Boss, you all right? Fine, Ajoong said. Get these people secured and medical teams for the wounded. He turned to Blue. And someone got her proper tactical gear. She's earned it. Kael's apartment was empty when they raided it. But his computer wasn't. Blue sat in Ajoong's study 3 days later, analyzing the final data files. Everything was there. 5 years of betrayal, of leaked information, of deals made with rival organizations. Kael had been systematically dismantling Ajoong's empire while positioning himself to take over. The gala assassination was supposed to be the final move. With Ajoong dead and the organization in chaos, Kael would have stepped in as the natural successor, backed by the rivals he'd been secretly partnering with. It would have worked too. If not for a clumsy waitress who turned out to be anything but. Ajoong entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one in front of her and settled into the chair across the desk. Kael was spotted crossing the border into Canada. My people are tracking him. He won't get far. No. He studied her for a moment. I spoke with your agency. Blue's hand froze halfway to the coffee. What did you tell them? That you were killed during the attack on my mansion. Tragic loss of an innocent victim. She stared at him. Why would you do that? Because you saved my life. Because you chose a side when it mattered. And because I'm offering you a choice now. He leaned forward, his expression serious. You can go back to your agency, tell them everything you've learned, and watch from a distance while they spend years trying to dismantle what I've built. Or you can stay as my partner. Equal authority, equal power. We clean out the corruption Kael left behind. Rebuild the organization into something that actually operates with honor instead of just pretending to. Blue shook her head slowly. You're a criminal. I'm a spy. This is insane. I'm a businessman operating in an illegal market, he corrected. And you're a woman with skills that could help me transform how that business operates. Think about it. Real change from the inside. No more agents like Kael betraying everything for profit. No more unnecessary violence. No more exploitation. And I'm supposed to believe you'll just suddenly become ethical? Ajoong smiled. I'm supposed to believe you'll just suddenly become a criminal? We meet in the middle. You bring oversight, intelligence, and strategy. I bring resources, connections, and an organization that could actually do good if properly directed. This is the worst idea I've ever heard. Probably. But you're considering it. She was. God help her, she was actually considering it. The agency would never approve. Her entire career had been built on taking down people like Ajoong. But he was right about one thing. She could spend years on the outside trying to change the system, or she could change it from within. What happened to the clumsy waitress? She asked quietly. She evolved. Same as me. He stood, moved around the desk, and extended his hand. So what do you say, Ghost? Ready to build an empire with a monster? Blue looked at his hand, at his face, at the future stretching out before her. Complicated, dangerous, possibly insane. But also real. Honest in a way her spy work had never been. She took his hand. Only if you stop calling yourself a monster. Partners don't lie to each other, remember? His fingers tightened around hers. Partners. Outside the study windows, the city stretched to the horizon. Somewhere out there, Kael was running. The agency thought she was dead. Her father was recovering in a hospital, paid for by a man who'd bought her to settle a debt. And Blue, the ghost, the spy who'd spent 7 years living in shadows, stepped into the light beside the person she'd been sent to destroy. Not as his servant. Not as his enemy. As his equal. Whatever came next, they'd face it together.